Welcome to 21st Sports Recap and Reaction for the Chicago Bears at the Minnesota Vikings in their Week 15 matchup played December 20th, 2015. We're going to go over the scores and the stats and give our breakdown and analysis for this NFC North rivalry game. As the Bears were looking to play spoiler and the Vikings were looking to keep pace with the Packers also in that wild card race as well. And in the first quarter, with about 6 minutes left in the first, Teddy Bridgewater hit Stephon Diggs for a 15-yard touchdown. Blair Walsh added the extra point, and it was 7-0 Minnesota over Chicago. So that was the score after one. Then in the second quarter, Blair Walsh hit a 53-yard field goal just seconds into the quarter, a little over half a minute in, to make it 10-0 Vikings over the Bears. But then with about 6 minutes left before halftime, Jay Cutler put the Bears on the scoreboard with a 10-yard touchdown pass to Alshon Jeffrey. Robbie Gould added the extra point, and it was 10-7 as the Bears cut the Vikings lead to 3. But then with less than half a minute left in the second quarter, Teddy Bridgewater hit Jerick McKinnon for a 17-yard touchdown. Blair Walsh added the extra point, and it was 17-7 at the half. And Adrian Peterson had actually left the game due to injury. He hurt his ankle and went to the locker rooms a little early, but he would come back out in the second half. And to start off the second half, on the first possession of the third quarter, the Bears would get into Minnesota territory, but on 1st and 10 from the 41, Jay Cutler was sacked by Robeson. He forced the fumble and recovered, and now the Vikings would take over, and they would end up with a 33-yard touchdown by Teddy Bridgewater to Stephon Diggs, and with the extra point by Walsh, it was 24-7. Minnesota over Chicago. But then with about 4.5 still left in the third, Robbie Gould hit a 51-yard field goal. That made it 24-10. So they cut the lead to 14, and that was the score after 3. But then in the fourth, with about 10 minutes left in this game, Jay Cutler was intercepted by Tratu. And now the Vikings would take over, and it only took them just over a minute to score as they were right there in the red zone. And Teddy Bridgewater takes it in himself. He leaps into the air, stretches out, and he scores on a 12-yard touchdown run. Blair Walsh adds the extra point, and it was 31-10 as the Vikings were now up by 21 points. But the Bears came right back, and they scored on their next possession, going down the field in 9 plays, eating up about 3.5 minutes, capped off by a 4-yard touchdown from Jay Cutler to Matt Forte to make it 31-17 after the extra point by Robbie Gould. And so now the Bears would end up going for an onside kick. The Vikings were covered, and they would go down the field, and they would get into the red zone, and on 3rd and goal from the 4, Teddy Bridgewater hit Zach Line for a 4-yard touchdown. Walsh added the extra point, and it was now 38-17. The Bears would get the ball back, and this game would come to a close with Chicago in Minnesota territory. But the Vikings hold on to win 38-17. They actually win this one. Pretty dominant performance. They led all game long. They never trailed at any point. And the Vikings keeping pace in the playoff race as the Minnesota Vikings are now 9-5 on the season, 1 game back of Green Bay. But they're right there in the hunt for the wild card. They're very close towards clinching. Haven't quite yet, but they are definitely putting themselves in prime position for the playoffs. Minnesota 5-2 at home. The Bears 4-3 on the road. They're 5-9 now on the season. So Minnesota getting a win against their division rivals, and it's never easy to beat your division rivals regardless of their record. But Minnesota coming up big, and Teddy Bridgewater 4 touchdowns in this game, a huge performance. And they were even without Peterson there for a little bit anyway. The defense, though, Minnesota doing quite the job, especially with those turnovers in the second half. Those 2 turnovers would lead to 2 touchdowns. But in this game, Teddy Bridgewater, 17 to 20, 231 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. He also had 17 yards on the ground and a rushing touchdown, giving him 5 total touchdowns in this game. Peterson, 18 carries for 63 yards. And Jerick McKinnon had 4 receptions for 76 yards and a touchdown. He also had 10 yards on the ground, giving him 86 total yards on the day. Stephon Diggs, 3 catches for 55 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Wallace had 3 catches for 37 yards. And for Chicago, Jay Cutler, 26 for 37, 231 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. Matt Forte, 8 carries for 47 yards. And he also had 6 catches for 57 yards, which gave him 104 total yards on the day, and he had a receiving touchdown as well. Jeremy Langford, 11 carries for 46 yards, 1 catch for 11 yards, giving him 57 total yards. And Zach Miller, 6 catches for 57 yards. Look at the kickers in this game. Blair Walsh was perfect, 1 for 1 on the field goals, 5 for 5 on the extra points. And that field goal, of course, was a 53-yarder. And Robbie Gould, he was perfect as well, 1 for 1 on the field goals and 2 for 2 on the extra points. His field goal was 51 yards. So both field goals over 50 yards in this game in Minnesota. It's not the Windy City, but it does get pretty windy up there in the Lake State, the land of 1,000 lakes. But in the defense for the Vikings, Chad Greenway had a sack, Hunter had 1.5 sacks, Johnson had a sack, and Robeson had a sack, a forced fumble, and a recovery. And Sharif Floyd had a half a sack, and Chateau had an interception. And for Chicago, Young had a sack. Look at the team stats: 21 first downs for the Bears, 20 first downs for the Vikings. On third down, the Vikings 8 of 12, 66% conversion rate on third down. The Bears 5 for 12, 41% conversion rate. They went for it once on fourth down, and they did convert for 100%. Total net yards: 350 for Minnesota, 293 for Chicago. On the ground, the Vikings netted 129, the Bears 94. And through the air, the Vikings netted 221. Bridgewater sacked once for a loss of 10 yards. Chicago netted 199 through the air, as Jay Cutler was sacked 5 times for a loss of 32 yards. Penalties in this game: 6 penalties against the Bears, 39 yards, 4 penalties against Minnesota for 45 yards. Each team had a fumble, but Minnesota recovered their own fumble, and they recovered the Bears' fumble. So the Bears had the lost fumble. And then we look at the red zone, and both teams were 100%. The Vikings 4 for 4 in the red zone. The Bears 2 for 2. Time of possession: 32 minutes, 10 seconds for the Vikings. 27 minutes, 50 seconds for the Bears. And a huge game for Bridgewater, is he ended up being responsible for all but 3 points for the Vikings, as he had those 4 passing touchdowns and, of course, the rushing touchdown as well. And Bridgewater, probably the best game so far of his young career. And that's a good sign for Minnesota, getting such a big performance out of Bridgewater, who was also extremely accurate in this game. So about 88% or so. So, I mean, Bridgewater coming up big time for the Vikings, and he outguns Jay Cutler, who's been known as a gunslinger. Both of them had 231 passing yards, but Bridgewater, no turnovers. He was nearly perfect in this game, and shown that extra effort as well on that rushing touchdown, coming up big time. And of course, the Vikings defense putting the pressure on, getting after the quarterback. And in Minnesota, the Vikings are a really tough team. They seem to play exceptionally well on the defensive side of the ball when they're at home. Their defense does travel too, but they play just on a whole nother level when they're in Minnesota. Of course, in the playoffs. They haven't made it yet. They do look like they're going to be a wild card team, although that remains to be seen. We'll see how things shape out, but more likely than not. But with Minnesota, though, they're going to have to go on the road, so that's going to be the big question mark for them in the playoffs, is if they can win in the road in the playoffs against a playoff team. But here we see against the Bears, they had really no problem. Like I said, they never trailed at any point. They were in control of this game throughout, and they finished strong in the second half. But let me know what you think in the comments section below. Definitely interested to read your thoughts and opinions. Thank you very much for listening. It is greatly appreciated. I hope you're having a good day and had a great weekend and enjoyed all the sports.